Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. As you can tell, I'm a little bit younger than your average speaker, so I'm extremely honored and slightly intimidated to be here. So I'm going to start off today by sharing a personal story. I first ran for public office when I ran for student body president of my elementary school in 4th grade. I was 8 years old at the time, and my parents and I made posters and campaigned all around the school. I ended up losing by 1 vote, right? I know, and if anything, this experience really taught me the meaning of that phrase, every vote counts. But it didn't really deter me. I stayed engaged in my community, and it really fueled that fire to keep going. So at age 16, I embarked again on another bid for public office. This time, I ran to be youth governor of California. But among a group of 16 candidates for the position, only 3 of us were young women. 3. So I knew something was off, and I knew I had to step in to fill that gap. Armed with my newly acquired California driver's license and an abundance of super PAC finances, aka my weekly allowance, I embarked upon a 6-month statewide nonstop campaign, driving all over the state and meeting tons of high school students. I knew that because this was a male-dominated field, I had to kind of fill in that gap, so I made sure to shake more hands than all of my competitors combined. I was so inspired. I could see the international headlines already. Devanshi Patel, youth governor of California, eradicates world hunger, human trafficking, poverty. I was so inspired. But unfortunately, things didn't go quite as planned. After suffering a narrow defeat, I was emotionally crushed. I wondered how things would ever be different for my generation if more young women didn't start running for office. In fact, for this position, we haven't had a female youth governor since the year 2002. It's been an entire decade. But more so, I wondered why more young women weren't supporting other women who ran for office. This was around the same time as the 2008 presidential election, and I turned on my TV every day to see the subtle and, let's be real, sometimes pretty obvious sexism that both female candidates, Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, faced on the national stage. My parents and teachers kept telling me that things would be different for my generation. That we'd see a female president in a matter of a few years. But I wondered how that would be a reality given my experience. I felt like we had a longer way to go. And I wondered if things were really all that different for my generation, considering the experiences that I just had. So for those of you who have seen the film Misrepresentation, this is kind of where my story leaves off. Fast forward 4 years, I'm now a junior at Stanford University. I'm studying international relations, ethnic studies, accompanied by a healthy dose of feminist studies. And while some of my experiences have shaped me and some of my 16-year-old naivety has faded, I still see this kind of gender gap and this gender inequity even in the college setting. So what did I see when I got to college? When I got to Stanford, I saw that even in an environment where women were free to thrive academically, socially, creatively, there was still the same kind of gap in women's leadership. Nationwide, women comprise 57% of the college population and earn 60% of all degrees. This is incredible, because this number is only rising. But this isn't translating into leadership inside the university setting. In terms of faculty, in the country, only 25 to 26% of female faculty members are full tenured professors. That's only a quarter. And less than a quarter of university presidents in the country are women. So what does this create? It creates an environment where women, who are the vast majority of students, are not seeing faculty positions and are not seeing people in leadership who truly represent them and their ideas. At my own university, Stanford, which is supposed to be this bastion of liberal thought and activism, we don't really, the same gap kind of exists. In the last decade, in terms of student leadership on campus, we've only had one female student body president. So I decided to do some research to see if this kind of trend was kind of similar not only in my school, but in other universities. And I was actually really excited to find that women on college campuses comprise about 50% of campus organizations. And so women are equally invested in campus organizations such as student groups, public service groups, pre-professional organizations, the clubs that you see on college campuses. Women are also about 50% of the leaders in those student groups. So we're pretty involved in our communities. But across the country, again, women do not even make up half of university-wide student government officials and student body presidents. Every year on my campus, I see dozens of female activists who are involved in really important issues like international development, education reform, also anti-war awareness. Women are an active and strong force in my college community. In fact, I'm one of those activists. But every spring, when it comes time for university-wide student government elections, I'm actually surprised to find an ever-decreasing number of women's names on the ballot. So we may think that, it's not a big deal, right? If women are still pretty involved in their communities, why does it even matter if we're not running for student government positions? It's still, we're still making a difference, right? Not quite. The truth about these student government positions, such as the student senate, officerships, and being the student body president, is that they offer a degree of visibility to the community at large. Not only that, but they allow members who occupy these positions to make important decisions that make a direct impact on the lives of students. And because they're chosen through popular election, they allow each and every one of us to see a woman in a position of power. And visibility is key here, because as Murray Wilson, the founder of the White House Project, puts it, you can't be what you can't see. So these are national trends. Women in college, but also in the real world, are very involved in civil society, but not running for office. This past month, we saw in this election that the percentage of women in the Senate jumped from 17% to 20%. This is great, right? We're very proud of this fact, but let's not forget that women are still 50% of the population, and that still 20% is 30% less than 50%. And that we may think that this is just an issue facing the existing pool of women's leaders, people who are running for office, but the truth is that these inequities are produced and reproduced at every age. Let's consider, for example, that while women are 20% of the Senate, in the next Congress, did you know that every committee chair in the House will still be a white male? So these discrepancies are not new, and considering the fact that the vast majority of our Congress members served in their student government in high school or college, we really are electing our future leaders when they're age 8, age 16, or age 20. So if college is too late, right, and these gaps are still being observed in the college setting, when do we start making these changes? Where does this change start? I'm very idealistic about the ability of education to solve this problem. Maybe it's because my mom's a teacher. But I believe that there are three main areas where we can educate future leaders in public service, but also just future leaders at large, that we're not currently harnessing our time and our effort into doing right now. These are three main areas of education where we're really not putting in the time and resources that we should be. I know this is kind of coming from me, my perspective as a student, but I think that if we really reconcentrate on these areas, we can prepare a new generation of public service leaders from the ground up. So the first of these areas is civic education. many of us may have taken a government or civics class in high school. You probably learned a little something about the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law, what the Supreme Court is, et cetera, et cetera. I went to public school in San Jose, where I took a government class in my senior year of high school. We learned a bit about the Constitution, something along those lines, current issues, problems facing the country. This is ring a bell. But this was 12th grade, and 12th grade was a little too late for me. It was a fun class, don't get me wrong. But 12th grade was a little too late. As you could see, I already had a clear interest in politics. So this class didn't really do much for me. Across the country, schools and districts are constantly neglecting basic civic or government education. Most students graduate from high school not having taken any government or civics class at all. But even from the few students who do graduate having taken these classes, when polled, only 41% said that their class had some mention or some lesson about the way in which the government works. So how can we expect students to participate in democracy when they don't know what democracy is? Even more horrifying to me, however, though, is that these same group of students, only 9% said that their civics or government class talked about racism, sexism, or other forms of discrimination and injustice in the country. And we wonder why our generation is regarded as apathetic. But when fewer than 1 out of every 10 American students who's already taken a government or civics class said that their class taught about injustice, when fewer than 1 out of every 10 of these students, how can we ever expect students to stand up against injustice if they aren't taught about injustice? This is important because students who have taken civics and government are not only more likely to vote or engage critically in elections, but they're also more likely to volunteer and participate in public service. As Carolyn Heldman, professor at Occidental College, says, boys and girls at age 7 in equal number want to grow up to be president of the United States. When you ask the same kids, the same boys and girls at age 15, only 11% of young girls still say they want to grow up to be president. That's a really small number. And at age 15, if these girls don't think that that's something that they can do, then clearly teaching them government during their senior year of high school is too late, and we need to start much earlier. We need to start earlier so that when they're 15, every boy and every girl still believes that he or she could grow up to be president. So the second of these areas where we really need to focus on educating our future leaders is debating and public speaking. We really need to teach our kids from very early on that they can speak out and it's okay to voice their opinion. I'll give you an example. This past spring, New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof engaged his Facebook friends and Twitter followers by saying that he posted a list of the country's top 10 high school debaters. His son was on this list. So he was a very proud father. But he asked why there weren't more young women's names on this list. In fact, in 2011, of the top 20 high school debaters in the country, only 5 were young women. That's 20%. You know, there's an almost obvious explanation for this. We socialize young girls from very early on to avoid confrontation and argument. We train them to avoid controversy. As Eve Ensler, author of the Vagina Monologues, says, as young girls, we become conditioned to please people rather than to fight back. When was the last time we told a girl to stop voicing her opinion or challenging authority? Right? So, you know, we saw with the election this year how important debates are in order to affect public opinion. So if we want our young girls to grow up and be president, they need to learn how to argue with boys. But even beyond that, debate really builds self-confidence, analytical skills, critical thinking, and these are important things not only for public service leadership, but pretty much every profession they could ever envision themselves to be. So finally, the last area where we really need to focus our education is STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. And this is important for public service. I'm going to get to that. But technology is an increasingly kind of ubiquitous part of our world, and an increasingly globalized context. We need to train our women, young women, from very early on in order to harness this power of technology and the internet. So I currently work with, in the Office of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in her Office of Innovation. Our office is working on bridging gaps between technology and governance. And so in this position, I've become increasingly aware of how we can really prepare the next generation, not just in terms of policymaking, but in terms of how to harness technology for policymaking. As my boss in this office, Alec Ross, who's Hillary Clinton's Senior Advisor for Innovation, says, technology has the power to transform social and political movements. So let's take an example. Let's consider Kiva, which is a predominantly online platform that connects lenders with small business owners who are predominantly women across the world. We need to give young women STEM education, not just so that they will be prepared for careers in the laboratory, but so that they can thrive in the halls of DC, whether that's in the National Security Council or at the Environmental Protection Agency. So there you have it. Those are the three main areas where I think we can really revamp our education system: public speaking, civic education, and STEM education. And it's our responsibility as students, as parents, as teachers, to demand these opportunities for our kids for holistic and comprehensive development. But while these are more kind of broad, sweeping measures that our schools and our education system can take, I believe that there's something that you and me, can do every day in order to make this kind of new leadership a priority and a reality. So whether that's working with young women age 8 or women who already have flourishing careers, let's make it a point to really reach out to women and tell them to take the risk that seeking leadership requires. Let's recruit women into these channels of leadership. You know, it's been a long time, okay, not so long time, 4 years, since my failed election bid at age 16. And I've come a long way. But looking back now, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. For the first time in my life, I became acutely aware that things really are different for girls, and that just being a part of my generation wasn't the solution. And while I'd like nothing more than to see more women in office, I've realized, especially now being in DC, that true change isn't going to come from a white-domed building 3,000 miles away, but it's going to come from the actions that you and I take as individuals every day to change our circumstances.